Night Shift at the Hospital. Confronting Hidden Evil. Part 9. Confronting the Darkness. The hospital was alive with a tension that crackled in the air, heavy and oppressive. It pressed down on Hannah and Laura as they walked through the dimly lit corridors, clutching the files that held the hospital's darkest secrets. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long, wavering shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. Every creak of the old building, every distant sound felt like a warning. The darkness within these walls was restless, and it knew they were coming. "Are you sure about this?" Laura asked, her voice low but tight with fear. She clutched the files to her chest as if they were a shield. "There's no going back," Hannah nodded, her jaw clenched. "We can't keep running. If we don't face it now, it will never end." She could feel the cold creeping in, the telltale sign that the spirits were near. They had to finish what they'd started. They reached the center of the hospital, the old maternity wing. It had been closed off for years, left to decay and gather dust. The air was colder here, thick with the scent of mildew and something far more ancient, something that reeked of sorrow and despair. The shadows seemed to pulse and breathe, as if the building itself were alive. Hannah and Laura stepped inside, the door creaking shut behind them. The temperature plummeted instantly, their breath misting in the air. Shadows gathered at the edges of the room, shifting and writhing. For a moment there was only silence. Then the whispering began, a cacophony of voices, each one filled with pain, anger, and desperation. "You promised safety," a spectral woman's voice echoed, her figure emerging from the darkness. Her face was gaunt, her eyes hollow and accusing. "You let us die." More figures appeared, mothers, children, staff who had been complicit or simply silent. Their forms were flickering, translucent, their faces twisted by their final moments. The room filled with their presence, and the air grew so cold it burned. Hannah's knees threatened to buckle. "We didn't know," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "We didn't know what happened here." "Lies," another spirit hissed, its voice a guttural rasp. "You are all the same. Promises and then pain. Promises and then death." Nora stepped forward, her eyes blazing with determination, despite the tears streaming down her face. "We are not the same. We want to help you. We want to make it right." The spirits paused, their forms flickering as if caught between worlds. The shadows writhed, and the temperature dropped further, but something had shifted. The air was thick with their pain, their longing for justice. "Help us," a child's voice asked, soft and broken. The boy stepped forward, his small form trembling. "How can you help when we are already gone?" Hannah's heart broke at the sight of him. She knelt, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "I don't know," she admitted, tears falling freely. "But we'll try. We'll tell the world what happened here. We'll make them remember you." The child's eyes widened, and for a moment the rage and sorrow in the room seemed to abate. The spirits around them wavered, their forms softening. "Words will not bring us back," the first woman said, her voice cracking. "But it is better than silence." The shadows suddenly surged, dark and violent. A deep, guttural growl echoed through the room, shaking the walls. "Silence is all they deserve." The darkness coalesced, forming a monstrous, shifting mass. It was different from the spirits, darker, more malevolent. This was the true heart of the hospital's curse, the embodiment of the pain, the lies, the cruelty that had festered for so long. It lashed out, tendrils of shadow striking like whips. Hannah and Laura barely had time to move, stumbling backward as the force of it knocked the breath from their lungs. The shadows wrapped around them, cold and suffocating. The spirits screamed, their forms flickering wildly as the malevolence tore at them. "Run," Laura gasped, struggling against the crushing weight of the shadows. But Hannah didn't move. She couldn't. She stared into the darkness, into the seething mass of rage and pain, and she understood. It was feeding on their suffering, on their fear. It wanted them to be afraid. "No," she whispered, her voice weak but growing stronger. "You won't win. You won't keep them here." The darkness roared, shaking the walls. But Hannah stood her ground. "You have no power over us," she said, her voice clear and steady. "You only have power over fear and silence. And we won't be silent anymore." The shadows recoiled, writhing as if in pain. The spirits surged forward, their forms flickering but determined. "It's time," the spectral woman said, her voice strong. "Time to end this." With a final, ear-splitting roar, the darkness shattered, its form dissolving into tendrils of shadow that evaporated into the air. The cold receded and the oppressive weight lifted. The spirits stood before them, their forms shimmering. "Thank you," the child whispered. His eyes filled with a mix of sadness and hope. "Don't forget us, we won't," Hannah promised, her voice thick with emotion. "We won't." The spirits began to fade, their forms growing faint. One by one they disappeared, leaving only the faintest trace of cold in the air. Hannah and Laura stood in silence, the weight of what they had witnessed pressing down on them. "It's over," Laura whispered, her voice shaking. "Isn't it?" Hannah looked around, the shadows still lingering at the edges of the room. "Not yet," she said, her voice heavy with determination. "But it's a start." They walked out of the old maternity wing, the files clutched tightly in their hands. The hospital's darkness was far from banished, but it had been weakened. The spirits had been heard, their pain acknowledged. And while shadows still lurked, watching and waiting, they no longer held the same power. As they stepped into the light, Hannah felt a flicker of hope. The fight wasn't over, but they had taken the first step, and they would keep fighting until every shadow, every restless soul found peace.